My daughter stole my life, so I took hers without lifting a finger. My name is Ruth. I am an old woman with neat hands and a careful memory. I keep my hair pinned and my tea warm, and I watch the house the way a lighthouse watches the coast, steady, patient, unblinking. Once I kept a husband alive by counting his pills, and I kept 2 children fed by stretching soup with potatoes. Once I clipped roses at dawn and ironed shirts until the pleats shone like small rivers. Once I believed a daughter was a second chance at my own voice. Then years went by and Mary grew into a woman with a smile like a closed door. Jonah moved far away where winters are harsher and people mean less to each other. I learned to enjoy quiet. I learned the sound of my own steps on the hallway boards. I learned comfort of the kettle beginning to sing. Then the calls began, not from Jonah, from Mary, short at first and full of concern. The kind of concern that checks the locks on windows before it checks the warmth in a room. I am worried. I am thinking of you. I am looking into options. That was the word Mary loved. Options, a word with teeth hidden behind silk. She offered rides to appointments I could walk to. She arrived with a folder that smelled of a new printer and laid it on my kitchen table beside my recipe cards. She wanted to help with bills. She wanted to manage the subscriptions I did not have. She wanted to modernize, to streamline, to simplify. I said I would think. She brought a pen that clicked like a metronome. I kept my eyes on the pen. I watched the rhythm. I did not sign. The first winter after Edward died was easy. The second less so. The third came with a fall on the back steps. A small fall, more fright than bruise. Yet it gave Mary a season to bloom. She arrived with tape measures and bright sticky notes. She measured my life in inches. The rug, the shelf, the bed, the reach of a hand to a kettle. She took photographs of my shoes and my pillbox and the garden gate. She called these assessments. I called them a tour. There is a difference between walking through a home and counting it. Mary counted. I began to write again. I kept a notebook in the oven drawer behind the metal pan I never used. I wrote down dates and visits and the way the light looked when Mary set her folder down. I wrote down the names of the people she used like stairs. Dennis the loan officer, Carla the notary, Ellen the neighbor, who repeats things like a clock. I practiced the quiet I am best at, the quiet that notices. I let Mary practice the noise she is best at, the noise that rearranges a room without moving furniture. The day Mary brought the power of attorney papers was a warm day with a breeze. She said it was standard. She said everyone does this now. She said the word protection until it sounded like a lid. I asked for tea. I poured water and watched steam slide up like a thought. I put the papers in a drawer and told Mary I would ask Jonah. The drawer stuck. The drawer always sticks when the wood swells. Mary laughed in a small way that did not touch her mouth. She did not like the word Jonah. She did not like anything that did not begin and end with Mary. She called the next day and the next. Then she stopped calling and began arriving. She came when the sun was low and left when it was lower. She cleared my desk of old letters and placed new envelopes in their place. Envelopes with windows that show your name like a prisoner. The letters used words that are not for old women to say aloud. Refinance, reverse, equity, release. I made a pot roast and watched Mary serve herself the heart of it. I watched the way she cut meat the way a person cuts a rope, quick in practice. Mary had been practicing somewhere else long before she came back to me. She began to forward my mail to a post office box. She called it consolidation. She said the house needed upgrades and she hired men who took measurements and left. She hired a painter who never lifted a brush. She brought in a woman named Paige who sniffed at my curtains and called them sentimental dust. Paige wore a gold watch and touched my table without seeing it. Paige said staging and smiled at the word like it was dessert. I poured tea for Paige and watched her hold the cup the way a person holds a fly by a wing. I asked where the furniture would go while strangers walked through the rooms and opened my closets and counted my dishes. Paige said storage and smiled again. Mary watched me watch. The next week a card from a bank appeared in my purse that I did not ask for. The card had my name and a limit larger than my grocery needs. Mary said it would be convenient. I cut the card into pieces while I listened to the rain and I put the pieces in different trash bags on different days. Mary brought another card. I cut again. On the third card she put my hand around the scissors and guided the blades backward until the card was whole again. Then she took the card home. I wrote down the card numbers with a pencil and I wrote down the dates of the withdrawals that appeared like new freckles. On the account I listed places I have never been. A salon in a neighborhood where shoes are louder than birds. A boutique that sells dresses made of promises. A restaurant where the plates look like moons. Mary had a taste for moons. I had a taste for broth and toast. And a little honey. Mary Mary told the doctor I was slipping. The doctor wrote mild cognitive decline. The words sat on the white paper like a spill. I watched Mary fold the paper into her folder. I watched the room get smaller around me without anyone moving a chair. Mary took my keys. Mary set up a daily caregiver without asking me if I needed one. The caregiver was kind and excellent at tea. The caregiver was a pair of eyes that reported to a phone. The caregiver wrote down what I ate and when I slept and how long I looked. At the garden, the caregiver smiled while counting my time. I learned to be smaller. I learned to occupy the space of a shawl. I learned to let Mary feel the heat of her own urgency until it embarrassed itself. I learned to wait in a chair while deeds printed slowly somewhere else. I learned the art of absence. I learned to leave rooms just before Mary entered them. I learned to leave silences where Mary wanted confessions. I learned to be so gentle that a rough hand feels its own roughness. Then came the day Mary took me to a place with a fountain in the entrance and a smell like lemon candy. She called it a community, a word that can mean a village or a pen. There were bowls of oranges and puzzles and a woman at the desk who wore a cardigan as if it were armor. Mary smiled at her and used my name like a key. A tour began, a room with a bed and a window and a dresser meant for smaller lives. My house is not a palace. It is a collection of breaths and prayers and soup and mended socks and the cupboard where Jonah hid a frog. But it is mine. The tour ended and forms appeared. I felt my palm become dry. I looked at Mary and saw Edward for an instant. Not the face, the urge, the hunger. I signed nothing. Mary smiled anyway. Mary had already set other papers in motion. Mary knew how to move a door by its hinges instead of its handle. The next week a notice came, then another, then a phone call I answered because it rang while Mary was stuck in traffic 2 towns away. The voice used words like delinquent and escrow and upcoming. I sat at the table and looked at the grain in the wood and remembered sanding it after a Christmas where no one came. The voice cleared its throat. I thanked the voice and set the phone down and took out my notebook. I turned to a clean page and wrote a name I had not used. Connie, the girl Mary shared a room with when Mary was 16 and I worked nights and the house felt like a stage. Connie who borrowed dresses and returned them with a smell. Connie who once came to my door years later and asked if I knew where Mary was. Because a bracelet had gone missing and a lie had grown too heavy. I had told Connie to go home that day. I had told her to forgive children for being children and to lock her drawers more carefully. I had become the lock then. Now I wrote Connie and her town, where her mother had moved, and I wrote a number Jonah had sent me 3 winters ago when he attempted to gather every thread of our past into a tidy knot. I dialed. The phone rang with the effort of a long run. Connie answered with a hello that carried a bruise. Decades old. I said Ruth. I said Mary. I said the soft parts and the hard parts, and I did not raise my voice. I asked questions no one had asked out loud, not to accuse, to measure. Connie told me about a summer Mary sold answers for exams and the fall Mary sold comfort as if comfort were a coat. Connie told me about a name Mary used to open a credit line that did not belong to Mary, a line that closed when a tired aunt threatened the police. Connie told me about a ring that never reappeared and a suitcase full of returns, with tags still clinging like stubborn leaves. I listened and wrote and drank water, not tea. I thanked Connie and I called Jonah. I told Jonah to come home for a long weekend and to bring a smile and a camera that stamps times and dates on photographs. Jonah arrived with a coat that made him look like a man who had forgiven snow. He hugged me in a way that checked my bones without making me feel brittle. Jonah walked the house with me and looked into corners the way a boy looks for his own monsters. I told Jonah about the folder and the cards and the fountain and the words. Jonah sat at my table and he made a new folder. Not a loud folder like Mary's, a quiet one that was heavier. Jonah visited the bank where the manager still remembered Edward's way of signing his name with a flourish. That looked like a fish. Jonah asked for statements and calendars, and the manager, who wears her hair in a bun that means business, complied with a politeness that knows when a son is also a witness. Jonah smiled for cameras with Mary and squeezed my fingers under the table with a code. 2 squeezes for patience, 3 for almost. Jonah placed a small device beneath the lip of the desk I never use, a device that records the sounds a house makes when truth rubs against it. Jonah did not say trap. Jonah said time. I baked a cake. I invited Mary for dessert on a weekday when Paige could not come and the caregiver had an evening class. I set out the good plates that have heard more family history than any lawyer. Mary arrived with a candle that smells like a hotel. Mary complimented the frosting and counted the forks and sat with her folder tucked under the chair like a dog. Mary ate a thin slice and folded the napkin and brought up the community me with the fountain as if it were a song stuck in her teeth. I nodded and poured coffee and left the room to fetch cream, and then left the cream in the fridge and stood in the hall long enough for a folder to be opened and a phone to call a number and a voice to say the address out loud and a plan to be repeated with dates. Jonah listened. In another room, the way snow listens at a window, still and thorough, I returned with the cream and a smile and a story about the cat that does not belong to anyone and is fed by everyone. Mary laughed the way people laugh when they are about to take something. The next day, Jonah went to a small office above a bakery where the coffee smells are honest. He met a woman named Nora who wears flats and files teeth with paperwork. Nora knows the slow doorways of the court and the quick hallways of banks and the way signatures matter mean everything until they mean nothing. Nora asked for my notebook. I handed it over. Nora asked for time. Jonah brought her time. Mary brought me another notice and another plan and a new caregiver who belonged to a company with a cheerful logo. The new caregiver walked like a guard who knows where the spares are kept. Mary forgot. Mary forgot about the little church on the corner where I have poured coffee for 39 years. Mary forgot about the pastor who knows the color of my living room and the pattern of my rugs and the temperament of my knees. The pastor and I organized a rummage sale. We set a table with old toys and older coats and a bright sign made by a teacher with tidy script. Mary came to the sale and performed generosity. She bought back a scarf she once threw away and wore it like a crown. While Mary performed, Nora filed. While Mary rehearsed, Nora stamped. The bank began to call a different number. The mail began to return to my house where it belongs. The staged photos of my rooms disappeared from the agency website. Paige called me with a voice that had lost its gold. Paige complained about confusion and contracts and cooling periods. I stirred soup and said the weather had been strange. Paige moved on to a new living room somewhere with taller ceilings. A clerk at the courthouse stamped a temporary order that placed a quiet hand over my deeds. The order did not show up on social media. It did not tell Mary its name. It simply sat between my house and the people who wanted to buy it as if it had always been there. Mary arrived with flowers that looked like apologies and smelled like a florist having a sale. Mary put the flowers in my sink and filled the vase. With the same impatience she filled forms with. Mary told me she had good news. Mary said the word clear. Mary said the word schedule. Mary said the word celebrate. I cut the stems shorter and let the water run until it felt cold. Jonah sat on the porch and looked like a man waiting for a delivery. A delivery arrived, not to the house, to a different house. A house where Mary parks down the street so neighbors will not recognize her car. A house that belongs to someone Mary calls a friend and signs as consultant when receipts are requested. The delivery was a big box with boutique letters on its side. The box contained the dress Mary had promised herself when the first check cleared. The dress did not arrive on time. The dress arrived when the device under my desk and the statements and the notary and the clerk and Nora and the pastor and the neighbor who sees everything on Tuesdays met in one folder whose spine did not bend. The folder had my name and the county seal and the printed words petition for protective order and affidavit and exhibit list. The exhibits were not dramatic. They were dull and faithful. Withdrawals at 3 in the afternoon accompanied by deposits at 6 in the same zip code. Signatures layered like onion skin. Calls to the fountain placed 3 times in a day. I was at the clinic with the nurse who writes everything down. The nurse wrote everything down. The nurse wears shoes that squeak when she hurries. And she hurried for me. Mary does not like squeaks. Mary likes glides. The day before, Mary planned to bring a moving truck to my driveway at 7 in the morning. A different car came. A car with 2 plain people who prefer rooms with echoes. They knocked and I opened and they asked for Mary. And I pointed to the street the way sunlight points to dust. Mary arrived 5 minutes later in a dress that thinks it is armor. Mary stepped out of her car and saw the plain people and smiled the way a person smiles when asked to pose for a photograph. The plain people did not ask for a smile. They asked for a signature book and a quiet place to talk. Mary came inside and sat at my table, the table where I taught her to cut biscuits. The plain people put papers down and spoke in sentences whose ends were sharp. They used full names and dates and cited items by number. They used the word explanation and the word risk and the words pending investigation. Jonah poured coffee and no one drank it. My hands were folded. My hands are good at folding. Mary talked about confusion and oversight and caregiving and stress. The plain people talked about fiduciary duties and patterns and conflicts and benefit. They asked about conning. The plain people asked about the post office box. They asked about the fountain. They asked why the dress was in Mary's closet. closet. They asked about the neighbor who reported a moving truck scheduled at 7. They asked about the signature on a document dated the day my knees were swollen and my doctor appointment was at 9, and the time stamp put me across town. The plain people did not raise their voices. They lifted the papers when necessary and placed them down again with the care given to a patient. Mary's mouth learned a new shape, not a smile, something like a door locked from the inside. Mary left with the plain people, not in cuffs, not with a crowd, simply smaller, quieter, less certain. The next weeks were dry and bright. I watered the garden and called Jonah when a hose came. I sliced peaches and froze halves in bags for winter. I wrote down dates and times and meals and dreams I could still remember. I slept, not like a child, like an old woman who earned each hour by outlasting all the others. Mary called once and left no message. Mary wrote once and used words that tried to be soft. Mary visited once and stood on the porch and did not cross the threshold. Mary looked at me like a person looks at a photograph of themselves taken from too close. Mary said nothing. Mary left a box of photos on the step and drove away. Inside the box were pictures from birthdays and school plays, and a trip to a lake where the water was so still we felt like trespassers. I looked for Mary inside those photos and saw her in every frame, trying to find herself, a girl who believed she had less than she deserved, a young woman who could not believe a door would open without a force, a daughter who learned too many lessons from a father who kept his colors folded. I placed the box in a closet where it can settle. I polished the table. I took a slow walk to the church. I sang without worrying about the notes. I sent Jonah home with soup in jars. I sent Nora a thank you card written in the pen that looks like a metronome. I sat in my chair and listened to nothing. A better music than any radio. My life returned to me the way a tide returns to a shore that never begged. Not all at once, not loudly, just constant, patient, precise. Mary lost her job quietly. Mary found another months later in a place where numbers are smaller and the doors have fewer locks. Mary sold the dress to a consignment shop that knows the smell of regret. Mary moved to an apartment with a view of a brick wall that is honest about what it is. Mary posts pictures of coffee cups with hearts in the foam because foam can be anything if you squint. I do not squint. I read the small print on the back of a soup can. I read the names of herbs in the garden and speak them like prayers. Rosemary for memory, thyme for courage, sage for clean air, mint for breath. I am Ruth, intact, in my kitchen. Remembering is enough.